All right, everybody. Thank you all for coming. And I'd like to call the July 7th, 2021 Reapportionment Task Force meeting to order. Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Ford, Fries, Gums,
here.
Kenyon,
Here, in room.
Martin,
Martin present.
Sanchez, Shepro, Strathman,
Strathman here.
Gately, Meyer, Arnold, Shelkey, Afif,
Here.
thank you, Hernandez, Pedersen, Rivera, Walter.
We don't have a quorum. We don't have a quorum. How many do we need for a quorum? Okay. We may be missing a quorum, which means we'll just have a discussion. Or we just go ahead and pass a map and be done with it.
That'll show them to not be here.
You missed the meeting.
Oh, there's fries. Now you've got
Here.
I believe we've got Pedersen online now too.
Okay. Well, we have to have the voting members. That's what's important. Ross is here, Combs is here, Kenyon is here, Martin is here, and Strathman. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, but we just need the voting members. Okay. Well, I'd like to know.
We have a quorum, don't we?
Ms. Nierman, we have 5 voting members.
I know she's checking the rules of when you set it up, so she'll have an
Okay,
answer for you in
okay,
a second.
thank you.
And Ron Ford just joined.
Karen, how many of the
Mr. Ford is here now as
Advisory.
well.
how many of the advisory board members do you have? Just so we know, 2? Okay, so you have 8.
And 5 board members.
That's a majority.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have 7 board members now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yes. Mr. Ford, you're here, correct?
Yes.
Okay, welcome. Thank you.
Yes, you have a quorum.
We have a quorum. Very good. Excellent. Thank you. Wonderful. All right. So for all of our board members who are not here, let's pass a map. No, no, that is not going to be happening today. So could we please have an approval of the June 24th minutes? I have a motion to approve. Thank you. Second.
And a second.
Are there any changes or amendments or edits to those minutes? Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Ford,
Present, yes.
Fries,
Yes.
Gums,
Yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Martin,
Martin, yes.
Sanchez, Shepro.
Whatever it is, I vote yes.
Thank you.
Just passed a map.
Strathman.
Strathman, yes.
Thank you.
Meeting is adjourned. Okay, very good. Is there any public comment? I see none on person. Is there any online? And I have received no written comment at all from the public, so there is no public comment. Is there any new or unfinished business that we need to discuss independently of the process of the discussion? Hearing none? Okay, very good. I'd like to just give an update of what we're going to be doing today. And I would again welcome all of you and thank you so much for giving up part of your Wednesday afternoon to attend this meeting. Reflect on what we have right now. We have a map that we're working with. It's a draft map. It's version map 2, version 3. You've all received a copy of it, and I believe that Roger will be able to put that up on the screen for all of us to see during our conversation. We all agreed at our previous meeting, last meeting, that that was the map that we were going to be using as our template. It is not the final map. It is a draft of a single map that we at least have got a map that we can start really looking at. So that'll be what we're going to be talking about today as well as into the near future. We have asked our board members, and if I could say the Aurora and the Elgin Caucus, to meet with us, and that was going to be last week. Those meetings have been postponed and are in the process of being rescheduled. Aurora, I believe, just rescheduled today, a week from this Friday at 1 o'clock. They'll be meeting. We are still waiting to hear from our members of the Elgin Caucus to arrange the time for their meeting, and I would ask that they do so as quickly as possible. If there are any other board members who have input, direct input on their concerns about what their district looks like, time would be available, be made for them as well. And we will do it in groups of no more than 2 because of concern of the Open Meetings Act. The meeting with the Aurora group and the Elgin group will be available to the public and be posted, so it is a formal meeting. The other meetings can be less formal. Roger will be there to assist you taking a look at the maps. What we're also going to be doing during these conversations now is that we're going to have the opportunity through the technology that Roger's team is able to provide is be able to do an actual live drawing with you. So you can see how your proposed solution to your district will impact everybody else's district. So it's not going to be, it no longer will be theoretical in nature. You'll actually be able to see the data of it. So as we go through that, you'll see how your suggested is either going to be helpful or harmful to another district. And I don't mean harmful like negative, but could certainly impact them and cause a crescendo throughout the rest of the map drawing process, which will get incredibly complicated. There has to be a point in time where we all agree to get and take a little bit. I think that's very important, and I think we all understand that in the greater end of compromise. You can feel free to reach out to your community constituents to ask also for their support and need, and the community members have been very helpful with this, and I would welcome their opportunity to come to one of these meetings as well and actually speak on issues that will that are important to their friends, to their neighbors, to their business contacts, because this is important to have. This map, again, is going to be set for 10 years. So we want to make sure that we are as open as possible as we redraw this. However, there has to be a time when we say enough already, and we have to stop. And I think everybody can arrange and realize that we can't keep on arranging the furniture back and forth. There has to be a point in time when we say it's enough. We will have approximately, figuring we start next week, approximately a month to be able to do this. At that time, we will be getting the actual census data. So we have to have our districts drawn so that we can start comparing those districts to the data that many of you have been most anxious and wanting to have. We all have. We all wanted to see what the actual census data looks like. And Phil is going to talk to us a little bit more about that today and remind that one more time of what this is. But the other thing, we we must be aware of and cognizant of as we go through this, and this is particularly for our board members who live in Aurora, live in Elgin, and those up in Carpentersville, we have to be very sensitive to the requirements and the restrictions that are imposed upon us by the Voting Rights Act. So that is something that once we get the census data, I know some of you may be concerned about, do we have the right data? Is it the right population? But that will be, that's the final data that we've all agreed upon, that has what we've been waiting for, and we will have no choice but yet to use that. That, I will have to cut out a bit early for school district. Okay, thank you, Michelle. So at this point, I'd like to bring up Phil, and I'd like him to go over one more time about this, and then I'd like to go to our board members and to our community members and I'm actually going to ask you what your thoughts are at this point about the map, so that we have an idea of where we should go as we're going forward.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll talk about a couple things. First thing is the census data, as Madam Chair talked about. That is set to be released no later than August 16th, actual census data. So within a few days, but no longer than a week, we will be able to lay the real census data on your proposed districts, or at least the most recent proposed districts. So we'll be able to actually see what that census data looks like instead of the ACS estimates. As you know, I've been, reticent to draw or to have a final map for obvious reasons with the ACS estimates. It has timing issues, et cetera. And I know some of you think your districts may or may not be portrayed correctly by the ACS estimates. When the census data comes out, we will know one way or another what the data we are forced to use is. You may say, or someone could say, well, that was April 2020. We're now in July or August or September 21. That's not what my district looks like today. The point is not what it's going to look like at the day you pass the map. It's what it looked like on April 1st, 2020, just so everybody is very clear about that. Happy to answer any other census questions you have, but at that time, we'll also have information down to the block level instead of what we now have at the block group level. We'll have better ideas of specifically Latinos and African Americans, but Latinos are the bigger demographic issue in this county that we need to be concerned about and protect. So we will have those numbers that will be more accurate at that point. The one thing we probably will not have at that point yet is citizenship. Citizenship numbers are what we call CVAP, citizens voting age population, that usually does not come out until several months. Sometimes, usually they come out in October. My guess is we're probably not going to see that until after you pass a map because of the delay in the census. So citizenship, and we'll talk about that in a minute, is one of those things we're going to have to still be guessing on a little bit because of the fact that we won't have that. I don't believe we'll have that hard data. As Madam Chair also spoke about the Voting Rights Act. The most important thing that here, you can draw a map and hit that plus or minus 5% or the total 10% deviation without a lot of help from me. I'll be honest with you. I can give you the 10%. You can see the numbers. They are what they are. It's not hard work. It's not rocket science. The big thing that we can help you with is Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. And that's why Josina was hired. That's why I think the way we can help you the best or I can help you the best is kind of giving you a handle on what the Section 2 issues are. And I know we've talked about it again. Let me give you a 2-minute primer. I promise I won't take much of your time on what the Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act requires. It requires that we provide an effective opportunity to elect candidates of their choice for racial and ethnic minorities where possible. What's a racial and ethnic minority? In this case, it's primarily Latino from a number standpoint, but Latinos, African Americans, Asian Americans, really there's nowhere in Illinois where there's enough Asian Americans to create a district, so they don't really matter. Now, that doesn't mean minority candidates have to win, but it does mean they have to have an effective opportunity to elect someone they choose, whether that person be white, black, Latino, it doesn't matter. It's who their candidate of choice is. And what we're trying to do is, how do we do this, I guess is the question. We create what we think are effective majority minority districts where possible. That's your goal. What is an effective majority minority district? In essence, an effective district is where if the white votes are cast as a block, every white person in a district votes against the Latino or African American's candidate of choice, the whites can stop a Latino from winning, or Latino candidate of choice, whether that be an African American, a white, or a Latino. If all the Latinos in a district, in this case, want a particular candidate, and there are enough Latinos to create a majority minority district, but all the whites vote to stop that particular candidate, no, you no longer have an effective majority minority district. So if you create a district with 52% Latino, and there is what we call racially polarized voting, where whites vote as a block, the chances of a Latino winning that race are slim, probably almost nil, if there is racially polarized voting. Why? Because two reasons. One is, as we talked about these before, Latinos historically have larger families than whites. So when you talk about a population, they may have, let's say a district has 10,000 Latinos in it and 10,000 whites in it. Of those 10,000 whites, 6,000 of those, or 5,000 may be of voting age. Only 3,000 or 4,000 of the Latinos may be of voting age, so hence every time the whites win. That's what happens in most just right voting age. Now you add in the fact that Latinos aren't all citizens. We have a significant, I think in Aurora in particular, has a significant amount of Latinos that are not citizens, cannot vote. So we end up, what we do is create, and it's not a safe harbor, but it's a rule of thumb of approximately 65%. So in order for a Latino to win, historically, it's been in that range. 63, 64, 65% is what's necessary for a Latino to have an effective opportunity to elect a candidate of their choice. Yes?
So could you explain the difference between the safe harbor and?
Yeah. A safe harbor is where if you hit it, you automatically, like if I told you 65% was a safe harbor, I could tell you in every chance your district is going to be legal. Okay? That's kind of how the law is set up, what a safe harbor is. This is not a safe harbor. There may be instances, and I'm not saying they occur here, we don't know, but there may be instances where certain pockets, specifically maybe in Chicago, the citizenship is so low of Latinos. It's a neighborhood or whatever of everybody is, or not everybody, but you have a large, large percentage of illegal immigrants or people who just are not eligible to vote. Or an area that has the family size is 10 and the 8 children can't vote, right? You got 2 parents and 8 children. So that under that scenario, even a 65% may not win. It is possible. But historically, we have this, what we call a rule of thumb that we've used for Latinos, that in that range, and it started actually with African Americans, that African Americans had bigger families, so you needed 55% of a total population for African Americans to win. What we now have though, and what you'll also have when the census data comes out, is you will have voting age population. You won't have citizenship, but you will have voting age. So we will be able to tell you, okay, in a particular district that Josina is now drawing at 65%, we may be able to say, okay, the voting age issue is not as big in this neighborhood. So we may only that 65% total pop may end up being actually, instead of 60% VAP or voting age population, it may be closer to 63. It may be 62, it may be 58. That'll help us, when we see those numbers, tell you, okay, this has a better chance of winning because the voting age population distinction is not as big as we once thought it was, or as what we assumed. We're kind of assuming 5% because that's kind of what historically we've found. I think, if I'm not mistaken, in the statewide, we're finding about a 4% voting age difference between, and I'd have to look at the numbers again, but between Latinos and whites. So it takes about 4% more Latinos from a voting age so if you had, let me just do this math in my head here. If I had 100 Latinos and 100, I can't do the math very well, sorry. But the point is that you may have the same demographic. You may take a group of 100 people, 100 whites, 100 Latinos, and 4% less of the whites, 4% more of the whites will be a voting age than of the Latino population. I've never had to really explain that, sorry, so I probably didn't do that very well. But voting age. Voter turnout is completely irrelevant in this process, okay? If a Latino, and it can be relevant at a different point, but I'm not gonna bore you with that. But it's really, if Latinos or whites or African Americans don't show up to vote, that's a different issue. That's on them. If they can't vote, then we protect those who can by allowing them to have more opportunities, because we're not trying to honestly protect the non-citizens' voting rights. We're trying to protect the citizens' voting rights so that they have an opportunity to elect. So that percentage of the Latino population that is citizens should have the exact same opportunity to elect a candidate of their choice as someone like I do as a white person. That's the goal. We kind of historically have found, as I started, that the citizenship for Latinos is about 10% less than whites. So while there are obviously white immigrants who are ineligible to vote because they're not citizens, it's approximately about a 10% greater amount of Latinos that have that concern than whites historically.
So just as to follow up with that, if I may, when we're drawing, particularly in our more urban areas, as we're drawing the map, if I'm hearing you correctly, we could have a population of 22,143 people. As we draw the map, we have to be sensitive to not only the non-citizens as far as population, but we also have to draw it according to blocks or precincts where there's a higher propensity of minority, if it's in a minority area, who then can vote appropriately, who are of the voting age. So as we manipulate the district, draw the district, we have to encourage the fact that the districts may look a little wonky because we have to make sure that we have enough minority voting population to hit that 65% marker. Is that correct?
Correct.
Got it.
Roger, do we have, are all those those are the versions of the King County, right?
The map on the left is the version
Okay.
2.3.
If you've ever seen the state map, which I'm sure all of you have, and it's usually really ugly, and I can say that.
Wonky is a good word.
Wonky's a really good word for that map, okay? The areas that it's the wonkiest or the least compact are those where the Section 2 districts are. So if you look at a map of the state map from the city of Chicago, it is kind of like a starfish or something, it's like a sunbeam, the sun's in the middle, which is in the city, let's call it the loop. And from there, all these districts are long and narrow out to oftentimes the suburbs even. There's one district, a Senate district, that goes from the south side of Chicago all the way to Kankakee. Those are because this issue we talked about of packing and cracking. Okay, so you will see uglier districts. Your section 2 districts are always historically your ugliest districts, your wonkiest, your least compact districts. And that is because you need to comply with section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. For example, if you have two districts, one's 80% and one's 45%, you have both packed and cracked. You have overly packed an 80% Latino, a district with 80% Latinos, and another district with 45. If they're next to each other, you could have most likely drawn two effective minority districts. Now that math may not be exact, but it's close. So you've in essence packed one district and you've created a second one that was lesser than it could have been to be an effective majority minority district. And at the end of the day, you've allowed one Latino to win and one to have no chance for election because of the fact that you've packed one district and cracked the other one. Mr. Shepro, I shouldn't be saying, I shouldn't be acknowledging people. I'm sorry, that's not my job.
So, the packing and cracking is one of the things that I guess I find the most puzzling. So, my question.
Microphone, please.
Assumptions.
Microphone,
Oh, sorry.
Mr. Shepro.
Shepro, microphone. So, using your example and assuming that the numbers are what
Yeah.
we're going to expect you do for the, so if you have a district that's say 35% and it's next to a district that is 95%, and even if you shifted the excess out of the 95, you would still not create an adjoining minority district.
It is,
Must you nevertheless do the shift?
no. I don't believe you do. I don't think, packing in itself is not a huge issue, except if it allows the district next to it not to be created as a majority minority district.
So I guess the follow-up is that, and again, this is an assumption, not a statement of fact, but if our 5 Section 2 districts in Aurora all met the minimum of 65 or 66%, but you had one district that had 95%, and the person didn't want to lose the constituents in her district, would that work or would that fatally?
No, I would not have a problem here. The reality of it is that minorities and people, not just minorities, but we kind of have a tendency to pack them ourselves. I mean, while it may not be right, the reality of it is a lot of times you see districts where Latinos live very close to each other. Caucasians, same thing. You know, African Americans, Latinos, that's right or wrong. That's the world we're living in. We can't put a blind eye to it, right? You know, I grew up in a town of Wheaton, which had, you know, almost 0 African Americans. That was just the reality of my life growing up. But so people live in packed areas. There's no doubt about that. If you can create another majority minority district, you should, by unpacking. That doesn't mean that every time you have an 80% Latino or African American district, it's bad. It's bad when next door is a 45% district that we didn't create a second district because we packed the other one, okay? For example, had one other example. Like if you had 3 45% districts that were Latino, or 3 districts that were 45% Latino, none of those probably can elect a candidate of their choice. So what you would do is you would create 2 65s and a 20 or however the math works out, so that you would have 2 Latino districts that are effective, and your third district would probably be 80, 90% white. There's nothing wrong with that. Same thing goes the other way around, is that if you could only draw 4 Latino districts in Aurora and you draw them all at 75%, or 80%, I would say go for it. But I think I don't think you can do that and then not create the 5th district when you have that opportunity. That's what I think everybody needs to know. So I think we have to create as many as reasonably possible effective districts. That it needs to be your goal.
Mr. Martin?
I have, excuse me, I have just a practical question. All the board members have been given an opportunity to meet and discuss their unique concerns with the configuration of their district, how their districts match with adjoining districts, all that type of thing. And I'm going to assume that either been done or that horse is out of the barn. So there should be some registered issues before people. For the purpose of my question, let's assume that the data we have is accurate, and that all we have left to address are the unique considerations that board members have brought relative to this neighborhood or that neighborhood. Are we in compliance with the law now? If we just said, I quit, if we complied with the law? Because if we have, then this discussion doesn't have much but entertainment value to it, because we can't carry it any further.
I'm not that entertaining either.
Oh, you're not. I'll give you that. But I mean, this discussion should be productive. And if we're sitting here now and you could advise us, or our legal team can advise us that where it stands now is in compliance with the federal statutes. Then if that's the case, then don't we say hot dog and then address it down the road when we get finite information to do these little tweaks and see if we create a violation?
Let me answer half the question. The other half I think needs to be answered by this board. The first question is the map that Josina has drawn that you have in front of you, version 2-3 or whatever we're calling it,
Yes, that's it.
is, in my opinion, is given the information we have, is compliant with the Voting Rights Act. Whether that's where you stop, I know there are other board members in particular areas that are not happy with that map.
No, I'm not.
So I'm only answering question 1. Question 2 is for this board, I guess.
No, what I'm saying is we're having a hypothetical conversation here, and the answer is where the map sits today, right, wrong, or indifferent, it's in compliance with the law.
The map
So-
you have today, I would recommend. Yes.
Okay, so you've recommended this. So all the board members, and I'm not diminishing anybody's concern about the shape of their district, but the only question before us is if I want to move my district to block, am I going to create a violation? And if I negotiate something with the board member next to me about the shape of the district and the two of us don't create a violation, I mean, this discussion, which I find to be somewhat repetitive about what we have to do to comply with federal statute, isn't relevant if we're complying with the federal statute. The question is, what do people want to do? And once they've indicated what they want to do and we put it on a live map,
No, he's right.
then we see if we violated federal statute. But if today, version 2,
3.
whatever this is,
3.
3, whatever this current one is, if it complies with the statute, to me, that's the starting point, and that's the end of the conversation until each board member's concerns have been addressed, either as being innocuous toward that federal issue or creating a federal issue, or creating a to-do with their next door neighbor who doesn't want to lose a block of ground. But the federal stuff, to me, becomes irrelevant as long as we're in compliance with it.
Mr. Martin, I would concur with what you're saying. However, particularly with a board member in Elgin who had a lot of questions, and a group of board members in Aurora who actually redrew the map. From those vantage points, there were significant concerns that totally changed the map.
As I said,
I'm just sharing this with you.
I'm not diminishing that. I'm just saying that 4 o'clock on this date, the map as it sits is legal. And so
Yes.
until those people have sat and raised and tried to address the issues in their separate territories, we really are just sitting and waiting for that.
And one of the issues, if I may, and then Mr. Shepro, what has been brought to our attention with the potential redraws that have happened from the, particularly, I mean, I'm not saying anything negative, it's what it is, from the Aurora caucus, is that some of the districts are now not in compliance with the Voting Rights Act. This is, the independent draw is not. And I want them, and I have to look out for the county. I mean,
I'm not suggesting we don't, but let's assume that the independent draw, that's the comment that I'm saying. Let's just say the Aurora caucus adopts the independent draw. So then it becomes the job of our legal staff to say, you've got to tweak it X, Y, and Z to do it. And that still becomes the conversation between our legal staff and the Aurora caucus as
Correct.
to how they divide that line.
that's correct. You're absolutely correct.
Well, to Madam Chairman's point and to Mr. Martin, the reason for my questions were that we know what some of the proposed alterations are. And I think one of the reasons we wanted Phil to come today was to remind us of what some of these tweaks, what the consequences could be. And so like my specific questions were based on what I understand to be specific changes or questions that have been raised by one or more board members. And I think the hope is that if there's a deeper understanding of what the impact of redrawing it would be, we would head off much of that discussion and not have to have it later. Because if we just get a market basket of, 20 comments, to me, that's not going to be a good thing. If we can dispose of some of those by pointing out either that what you want can't be done or what you want could be done, but has to be done cooperatively, I guess I think that's still worth doing. And especially if we're inviting people over the next few weeks to come in with ideas. And I think the idea is we don't want people to come in with ideas that we know won't work because of what the consequences are. And while we don't know everything, because the caucuses haven't had their meeting, many of us have had conversations, I know I have, with individual board members who have raised those issues. So I guess I think, yes, it is a little repetitive, but I think many of us felt we all needed a little bit of a reminder about exactly what the rules are.
Can I say something about the Aurora map? It's not from a voting rights standpoint, it's not hugely far off. Where its biggest problem is, and I'm assuming some people are either here or listening,
They are.
is the deviations. They got not very far off because of deviations being very far off. We have districts in the map I've seen at minus almost 19%.
Could you repeat that, please?
We have districts from a deviation standpoint that when we put it in the system, the Maptitude system, at least based on the 2015 to 2019 ACS estimates that we've been using, we have districts that are 9.9% low, 13.5% low, 18.7% low. And on the other hand, we have another district that is 14.4% high. So we have a total
population.
by population. So from a voting rights standpoint, I mean, it's not hugely off. I mean, because you have 5 districts over 60. A few of them need to be strengthened from 61 to at least 63, 64, 65. But I think the reason they're closer than I think they may be otherwise is because of the fact that the population deviation is so far off. So like one of the districts, 2 of the districts are above 70% Hispanic, but they're also got that way because they're short 3,000 and 4,000 people. It's easier to get a 70% or a 65% when your district's short people, right? That's just simple math. So that, though, just so everybody's clear, that is, at least with the data we have today, the largest concern. I have two concerns with, let's call it the Aurora 2 map or the independent Aurora map. And it's, you know, I think it's very close on the voting rights. I think it can be modified to get there from that percentage or from those percentages. The problem is the deviations that I'm seeing are just, we're over 30, we're at 33% deviation when we only can be at 10. So now it may be that these ACS numbers are that far off. I doubt they're that far off, but they could be. I don't know these areas. If they're areas that changed a lot from 2017 to 2019 or 2020, there was a lot of growth or a lot of loss. Maybe it works, but those are the concerns I'm personally seeing with, let's call it the independent map at this point. I know, Roger, we're going to have, I guess, a meeting next week, but Roger's going to walk through it. I'm going to be there if at all possible, so that we can show and see if there's a way to work through some of those. But the population deviation is just a huge issue. So I just want everybody to know that ahead of time.
The other thing that I would like to bring up, which has been a general concern to some of our board members, are precincts. They are very concerned about split precincts within districts. And
Yeah, you want me to talk about that?
everybody, we need to talk about precincts because there was concerns by many people about, oh my gosh, my precinct is cut in half, my precinct is cut in third. We have to forget about precincts. Precincts exist in the past. They do not exist with the new maps. The precincts, on many cases, have to be redone. There may be 4,000 or 5,000 people, 3,000 people in a precinct. So these precincts are going to have to be redrawn, and they will be redrawn accordingly to the maps that are drawn. So the boundary lines come first, the precincts come second into those. So that's the procedure that's going to be happening. And then on top of the precinct draw, I was made aware yesterday that we may also have to be sensitive to the finalization of the state map for state reps, state senate, to make sure that the precincts are somewhat aligned within those districts as well. So we will have two other layers, or one other layer.
And
because of the
maybe a
reps.
congressional.
Perhaps congressional.
Maybe. I don't
Yeah.
know. I mean, they're bigger
Perhaps.
districts, but yeah, I mean, the state doesn't, at the state level, they start with what we call VTDs or precincts when they draw. But the reality of it is that to zero out or get close to zero, a lot of precincts are broken at the block level.
This is congressional.
No, at the state level, they're just broken. And congressional is even more so. Right now, the state map, according to the ACS numbers, is, less than 1% deviation on each, plus or minus one, according to the people who drew it. I'll just make that statement, according to the people who drew it. The reason we don't have a congressional map is because they have to be at zero deviation. To get there, there is no way to draw a congressional map without breaking precincts, or just can't be done. And I've drawn, been in the room with many, many maps being drawn. It can't happen. So, and on the state side, they broke precincts. They just did. So if this map, the one that's been passed, stays in place, you're going to see that. I think if the map that is passed does not stay in place, you're still going to see it. And they're already talking, Springfield is already talking about about the possibility of having a special session to redraw the state map. Because it's just going to be, it's just the reality of what happens when the data comes out. So the reality of it is precincts are, while they may be important as elected officials, they may be important to candidates, from a legal standpoint, they're less important than getting these other things taken care of.
They have to come last.
And they come last. The precincts will come last. And that they will come after the board approves the final map hoping for that date in September. So for everybody who's very concerned about precincts, or if you have a colleague who's concerned about precincts, please let them know that the precinct will no longer exist in this current reiteration. It'll be a new precinct. Maybe the same, maybe the same, maybe not. There'll be some changes, especially around the edges. Or if your precinct has grown substantially. God help us all, the person who gets a precinct with 3,000, 4,000 people in it. It's a huge precinct to walk through. When they should be, I think, legally anywhere from 600 to 800. So
Yes.
we have to shift it. We have to shift those. So there'll be additional precincts, change precincts, more user-friendly precincts. So that is going to be happening. So are there any questions further for Phil?
Yes, Madam Chair Strathman.
Yes.
I appreciate the repeating. I'm learning a little bit more each time, so I appreciate.
Hopefully I'm
this.
getting better at describing it each time. Maybe that's helping.
Well, then maybe it's both, but I'm learning something more each time. I do have a question though about the vote that you said was racially motivated.
Racially polarized voting,
Polarized,
yes.
thank you for that. How is that, other than obvious, how is that determined? Oh, I can see you didn't want me to ask this question.
No, I'm happy to have you ask it.
Okay.
Just not, I've actually studied it and still don't understand it. In essence, what they do is there's a statistical analysis that political scientists, statisticians do, where they go look at precincts and say, okay, and do what we call double regression or ecological inference, both terms that I slightly understand. And they do an analysis to actually determine whether racially polarized voting is occurring in a particular area. It looks at particular neighborhood. It just goes down to the precinct level and says, okay, this precinct is 90% white, and it's much more complicated than this, please. But we saw 90% of the whites vote for a candidate. 90% of this precinct voted for candidate A, who happened to be white, and 10% voted, the other 10%, or 10% of the precinct, which is also the number of the Latinos, voted for candidate B, who happened to be Latino. There's an assumption at that point that whites voted for the white candidate and Latinos voted for the Latino candidate.
Is there not a nuance to that?
There is a lot of nuance to it, but they believe that when you take all these precincts together, that the average doubles that out. Now, they do regression once, they do what they call double regression, or then there's a guy at Harvard, Gary King, who created ecological inference. I spent 3 days with him once trying to learn it. I know about this much after 3 days. But that's what the courts look to determine whether something is racially polarized, is those two kinds of statistical tests.
Okay.
And
I'm
that's
not sure
about
I
as
get
good
it,
as I
but
can get, and I
thank you.
apologize.
Okay.
Yes,
Thank you.
Mr. Shepro. And then if there's any, I'd like to get questions and I'd
Right.
like to hear back from everybody.
But as I understand it, to Ms. Strathman, that is not a purely theoretical exercise. You would have to take the actual data from that precinct and then presumably, well, this is the question, you could say the reason this happened is that the polarized candidate or the one who was polarized against was under federal indictment at the time or something like that. And so it's not an automatic.
Correct. And
I mean, I know you don't want to get into that at a litigation, but.
correct. Also, what they try not to do is use one race, so that you use a number of different elections so that you can determine that, because you're right, there's one-offs, right? I mean, we've seen people who are under indictment win or lose, but they will take, in essence, let's say 7 races and try and determine how many of those were racially polarized. And if the majority of them are, then it's one thing. If the majority are not, then it's a different answer.
All right. Okay, yes.
Yeah, I just want to make the comment, this gentleman was nice enough to explain at the last meeting I attended about how we had to keep our numbers here back when they were originally counted in 2020, because that was the year we took the census, and now we're, a year or half a year beyond that.
Microphone, please.
Not in the microphone.
Microphone and
Not
Mayor,
everybody.
can we have your name, please?
Yeah, Mayor Shelkey from the city of Batavia. We're sometime after when the census has been taken. And I raised the question, and he gave me the very good answer, that basically we have to rely this numbers on what was counted in 2020. Because I could probably right now, I went back after we had that conversation to my city, and we figured out we've got 4 projects in our town that have all occurred since the census was taken that easily add 1,000 people to our population. And so they're just out there forgotten in the wilderness for, I guess, 10 years until we count the town again. But I mean, that's the type of, and basically what happened, with the pandemic and everything got all botched up and slowed down. And this will probably end up being one of the most inaccurate censuses we've ever taken in the United States. Probably no fault of anybody, but just the sort of circumstances that have happened. But this really is, I can see where a lot of people would want to question a lot of different factors in this thing. And I think overall, this county staff and our consultants have done an excellent job trying to bring it together despite all the adversity and, holes in the road that have been thrown in front of them as they've tried to complete this. I mean, this was a very complex process, and it created a bunch of situations of which there was no real good answer.
Yes, it's true. It's true. And I believe that'll also happen with the drawing of the precincts to still use the 2020 census data. So
Yes.
there will be larger precincts, inherently larger precincts because of that.
Precincts will be drawn, though, Shepro, by registered voters
Correct.
and
right.
the population, because no court case I know has said that the precincts have to be
Independent of, thank you.
comply with the Voting Rights Act. So they can be different, and they are supposed to be based on registered voters.
So they will be represented, all voting members, registered voters who have recently moved in to current count or as of 2020.
Oh, I mean, when people vote in the 2022 primary, they will be voting in the new precincts, we hope. And everybody who's registered will have the right to cast a vote for, a precinct committeeman if they can find people foolish enough to run.
Well, adventurous enough to run.
Yes.
So what I'd like to do is take a look now, if we may, to go on to our community members and just ask them how they feel about the map, and if they have any input, and if they would frankly like to come to one of the meetings that we're going to be having, particularly those in Elgin or Aurora, or if they are interested in setting up another time so that we can start arranging those times to meet. And that would be, of course, under a separate conversation. So I'm not going to have anybody commit to a calendar at this point. So let me get my glasses on. Mr. Feith?
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Chair. I appreciate this process and the maps that are drawn so far. More so than having an opinion on the map itself, I wanted to comment on the fact that I appreciate the focus on the Voting Rights Act and the focus on ensuring minority voting related issues. What the map looks like will really I'll have an opinion on that once the actual census data is available and laid atop, and to see, what changes will need to be made. And then to your question, yes, in the Elgin area, I would like to participate in that meeting.
Very good, very good. And I believe that's going to be Friday at, no, Elgin has to be scheduled yet.
We're coming closer to the time.
Okay, so they will keep you. If you would like, we will put you in the loop so that you can be part of that selection of what time would be convenient for you. Okay,
That
thank
would be
you.
great. Thank you.
Mr. Arnold is not here. Mr. Gately is not here. Mr. Hernandez is not here. Is Mr. Meyer here? No. Pedersen? I think I saw you online.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me? Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, I'm going to be at both meetings, the Elgin and Aurora meeting. So I know Aurora is next week at 1 o'clock or whatever it is. And then whenever Elgin, please let me know. You know, I think the process is going well. I do think we need to address concerns that we have been addressing. I will save some of my comments for some of those two smaller meetings in that area of certain people in the community who brought some concerns. But I agree that one of the biggest concerns I'm hearing, which I have been taking the same stance, is this the fear of the precincts, breaking up precincts and all this other stuff. And I said, you know, that can't be of our concern at all. I felt that the maps were drawn very closely to precinct lines, and at least in areas outside of Elgin and Aurora. And I'm glad that we're taking the stance that we're just going to kind of walk away from that and really just figure out the issues to make sure that we have the right number of people, minorities in each district that we can. My biggest concern, and I think I agree with a lot of some people here, is that I do feel that I know we're trying to get a map as close to possible, so that when the census numbers come, we're right there, you know, with as little deviation as possible. But I do feel like that seems to be a big sticking issue. Since we've given ourselves some more time to kind of do this, part of me wonders, you know, since it sounds like the numbers are coming out even sooner than we thought, you know, whether it's better to just kind of do this when we are really working with the census numbers. That's kind of, because I feel like we're going to continue to go around the same issue until we have those numbers with these tightly packed districts. You know, it's not such a big deal in some of the bigger ones, but it is a big deal in some of these tightly packed districts in Elgin and Aurora. So that's just my one concern, is that we may be doing all of this meetings, these small meetings again after the census numbers.
Okay. Okay. All right. Very good. Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Rivera? No. Mr. Schalke, do you have another comment you'd like to make, Mayor Schalke?
No, I already
Okay.
said my sentiment.
This, Madam Chair Ford.
Mr. Ford, I'm going to get to you in just a little
Okay.
bit, if I may. I just
Right.
want to go through our community members first, and then I will go through our board members. So I got you. Mr. Walter? No? Okay. Mr. Shepro?
Well, as you know, I've had some concerns about the process as it unfolded, but I would say that the map that has emerged, subject to many people who have perhaps valid comments to make to it, I think is about as good as we could have possibly done. I think, you know, based on my understanding, we're now at a point where we are, I think, not going to say this is it and then say something later, but we are going to say this might be it, but now we are going to allow board members and any committee members and so forth to come in and say, what about my precinct? What about this? What about that? And there's no way, obviously, that we are going to do that by next Tuesday. And I think a number of people, including the chair, pointed out, we're so close now to the date when we will have the actual data that the idea of doing everything twice doesn't seem very attractive. And I feel that many of the questions that people have or the concerns will be addressed when we get the data. You know, people can't say anymore, well, yeah, you said this, but I'm convinced there'll be another 1,000 people here. We will now know that answer. And I also had the idea that a number of the objections were based simply on the line through a precinct. And as you pointed out, that's a discussion that I think is irrelevant because those precincts have to be re-examined eventually separately. And I would doubt that we are going to be able to not split any precincts, but we're going to have to harmonize them with our map, the state map, and the congressional map. And that's not going to be done in a day either. So, and again, we need to have final maps. This map will have to become final, obviously, at some point in the fall. The congressional map is yet to be really drawn, at least publicly. And we hear, and you can hear everything, I guess, if you listen long enough, that there may be tweaks to the state map. So I think the precinct issue needs to just go away. People can start thinking about when they are split. You know, I've talked to some people and say, your precinct has 3,000 people. It's going to be split. Do you have ideas about where that would be? Because there again, there we can take into account matters that might not be applicable for the Voting Rights Act. But now you can say, well, we don't want to cross a busy street. We want to stay within a neighborhood. And obviously that'll have to be done with the assistance of Mr. Cunningham and his staff. So I feel that we are on the right track. Many concerns, I think, were already addressed in version 2.3 when you compare it to the earlier version. I know that I think that many of Ms. Warnicki and Mr. Fraz's concerns were addressed. There was a redraw. There's some other redraws. We're not done, but I think we're most of the way there. And I support the process, and I have full confidence that Roger and his staff and our legal team will have a handle on this. And you know, the education process for us, I guess, will continue. So sorry for the lengthy, but I think, you know, we have done about all we can do to this point.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's up to our board members to give us their arguments or their proposals.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Ford, you're next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really appreciate the time and all the comments that have been presented. My thing is that when we look at these set of maps, and I appreciate the effort been put into them, is that we're kind of saying that this is the only option there is without giving which we now are given a chance to see if there are any other options. Other part is board members having a fair chance of having input didn't really happen to now because there's information that have been asked for that we really didn't receive to see how numbers will work if we look at the map in a different perspective. So I am looking forward to next Friday to see how that comes out, which I'm pretty confident that to balance out numbers and match what we're supposed to be doing, I think it's pretty well accomplishable by what I've seen, what's been presented so far with the redrawing of the Aurora area.
Okay, well, very good. Thank you for that. Just so we are aware, we have to be sensitive to Phil's comments about real population. We have to make sure that we are working with accurate population numbers beyond that scope of minority or majority districts. So we have to make sure that we have good people count as we go through this and not have that deviation. But that will all be presented and the map will be live and you can see how it impacts as it's being drawn. I believe that technology is going to be provided. It'll be an interesting discussion for sure. Mr. Foz.
I didn't have my hand up.
You have nothing. You have nothing to say?
I have nothing to add, no.
Thank you. I'm just going through all of our elected officials through this as well. Ms. Gumps, are you still online?
Yeah, but I'm still here so far. I'm multitasking. I'll just leave it at that. I would just like to parrot everybody else. I do like the process. I think things are going in the right direction. I've been hesitant because the lack of actual data, and it's very hard for me to weigh in on the big issue without that data. So
Are you
I
talking,
think
just clarification, are you talking about census data?
census data, correct? Because it seems to me, and I think some other folks have mentioned it too, it's, we don't want to do this twice. And it seems like we're spinning our wheels a little bit. I'm looking forward to the Aurora caucus. I think a lot of wrinkles will get ironed out in both of those. And, it is what it is. Things are going good so far, though.
Okay, very good, thank you. Well, looking forward to getting the wrinkles out. Mr. Kenyon, did you bring your granddaughter?
I could bring her to help with the map, but
I'll have to, just
I've
a
always
tease.
felt very good that I represented one town. And they are not of one mind, but they think similarly. And now we have big projects of people moving in that never lived in South Elgin, never lived in Kane County, and people that haven't even registered to vote. But it's okay. Shepro said all the words, so I'll be with Mr. Frost. I don't have really anything to add.
Okay, very good. If you have any words that you think of later on, just let us know. We'll schedule that meeting. Okay. Always look forward to speaking with you. Mr. Martin.
I really have nothing of substance to add. I like where the process has taken us. At least as I look at it, the goal here is for the north end of the county and the south end of the county to try to negotiate something acceptable to them so that we can move this thing forward without taking a vote that doesn't take things, they need to work a deal, I guess is what I'm saying. It has to be a legal deal, but they have to work it, or else the rest of the board is kind of in a trick bag of saying, well, we've got to get this done. And I don't want to do that. I would certainly ask my colleagues to the south and to the north to conclude their negotiations in a way that they can live with. And remember that if everybody is unhappy, that means they probably negotiated a successful compromise.
Said like a good attorney. Excellent advice with that. Mr. Sanchez, are you online? No, Ms. Strathman.
Strathman here. I think that I would repeat what other people have said. I've been impressed with the process. I think that there's a spirit of cooperation and a willingness to work together for the common good, and I like that. The Elgin group is working together, and we are narrowing down our time to meet next week, so we will be, meeting and getting that worked out. And I think it's been a really great process. I'm impressed with the group.
Oh, good. Thank you. We're trying to be as collaborative and as open as we possibly can. So next steps.
Madam Chairman, this is Alan. May I speak also?
Oh, of course you may, please.
Thanks. I am hopeful. I appreciate the fact that we are collaborating. Everybody has to give a little and nobody will be completely happy. I appreciated your comment where you said it would be great if our druthers matched the data as much as possible. I have this question, and it's a holistic one that I think no one can answer, but it's like this. I am one of the people who lives in an old area, an old part of town. And so we don't have new subdivisions coming in. We have some fixing up going on. But I noticed between my 2011 map and my 2021 map that I have a precinct where I lost 700 people. That's not terribly likely. I have 3 precincts where I lost 400 people. I have another precinct where I lost 350 people. I'm hopeful that our census data is going to be more accurate. It's in the past, there's no way to go out and help it now, but those numbers are just, those numbers are unrealistic, and it would be awful if we had to work from them. So I'm just hoping the census data is going to be a little closer to what we expect. Thank you.
Okay, and please do remember that the precincts are non-existent at this point. As a reminder, the precincts are going to come after the actual boundary lines of the district is drawn. So where you may have loss in your precincts, that's not to be counted at this point because those precincts are going to be different. All of them are going to be different.
Sure, I appreciate that, but I don't think the people went anywhere. We didn't have that many deaths. We didn't have that many births. We're more status quo. It doesn't really matter where the precincts are. The people are still there somewhere. We just need to, I'm just worried about our having counted them or having been able to count them with the process and COVID. Thank you.
Thank you. And you are planning on attending next week's meeting, is that correct?
Sure.
Perfect, perfect. And if you can, for all the board members, if you are able to come in person, I would like to recommend that. That way you can have that kind of conversation together. It is a public meeting, so we will not be breaking any kind of the Open Meetings Act at all. So you are welcome to come. If it is a smaller group, it'll be limited to 2. So just so you know how it's going to be worked. So again, let me go to next steps. Oh, of course. I'm sorry. Absolutely. Ms. Winnicki.
The meeting for next week, I think it would be really helpful if we had a representative from the clerk's office, maybe Jack himself, or somebody who has the experience of the past experience of splitting precincts up. Because I think, like Ken said, I know that's the last step when they start splitting precincts, but I think it'll give us a better idea. Maybe we could do a little predetermining, if that's possible, of what the end result will be when we start splitting up precincts. You know, where will they move to? Who will gain, like, kind of thinking about what Deb just said, where will those people be moved to? Will they be taken out of a certain district, put into a certain district? And maybe to become more accurate, it might help us, like I say, predetermine what will happen in the future.
I think that one.
I'm thinking specifically the 2 biggest precincts, which I think would be Campton 7, but then Pingree Grove has the largest, I believe, precinct.
7,000 people.
7,000, that's huge. I mean, that is just huge. So it's just a thought. I thought, you know, having somebody here and kind of explain to us maybe what the steps will be taken to start splitting up those precincts, things they look at, how they determine where they're going to split the precincts and move people, you know, around. So I see Ken's just anxious to.
Madam Chair, could
Yeah,
I?
yes.
I think that's a discussion that should be had, but I don't think that it would facilitate the current discussion because, as pointed out, the issue is population, not where a precinct line is. So, like to Mrs. Allen's question, she thinks there are people there that aren't reflected in the data. We will find out if that's true. If it is true, then we'll have to act accordingly. If it's not, then that argument goes away. I fear that if you start, I mean, again, Mr. Cunningham has his own view about the precincts, but he has repeatedly stated on the record that he does not believe that precincts need to be split, or at least that only a few need to be split. And I think that will bring in a extraneous or untimely discussion that we really need to wait. I mean, it's really not an issue to me of what precinct is in what district. It's where's the district boundary line. And the precincts get cut or trimmed to fit that outcome,
Oh, it's,
and really not the other way around. And, you know, in the past, we'd said, well, we look at a map and we say, what happens if we switch precinct X? But this time, precinct X has so many people that you really couldn't shift like Pingree Grove's precinct.
Mhm.
If you shifted it anywhere, it would automatically put the map completely out of kilter. So I think, you know, Jack might be happy to give us a primer on how to do that, but I would urge that it not be part of the group regional discussions, because I think it's gonna be a distraction from the real issues.
And if I may, I think it's a great idea, but I'd like to hold back until we have a consensus on where the map should be.
Mm.
And then that will be the next step, because I would like this group, the task force, to actually hear that conversation rather than going through each of the little subgroups, because we need to hear that as a collective force. So we all are on the same page with the same knowledge as we do that. But a great idea. No, great part of that. Is there anything else? Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you for that. Well done. Okay, so next steps. We are finished, I think, with the task force at this point. We're going to be meeting individually, as I mentioned, over the next month, approximately, maybe even 5 weeks, to make sure that we've gotten all of your input. We have to have a timeline on this. We can't continue. So I would suggest that once we have the caucuses meet, unless there is not a sense of compromise and you need to come back, I would say, please, caucuses no more than 2 times, because you've had a lot of time to consider and what's going on. And then after that, and these are just my thoughts with this because I want to get your input on it. After that, we have to allow the map, then if there's are any changes that are going to be made with the lines versus version 3, that we are allowed to have the time to redraw that. And then we'll present that to you. But I'm going to let it sit there then, because then we can take a look at that, because that's all by input. And we have to make sure that we've got our attorney and our demographer all reaching out and putting their knowledge on top of that and expertise as well as Roger, of course, making sure that the map is presented appropriately. Then we will reconvene once we get the census data. And we can share the map as soon as we get it done, the draft of it, and you'll have plenty of time to look at it. But that map probably is not going to be done until August, sometime mid-August. And then the census data is going to be coming in sometime in mid-August as well. So we can reconvene, take a look at it. Hopefully it's done. And then we can start taking a look at the census data, layer the census data on it. And then once again, we have to go out to the public, either go out there in person, as we did before we convene our town halls, or bring them here and have public viewing with public input. Because that's a legal component of this that we have to do. And I want to make sure that the public has got plenty of time, so that if there's any shifting again, we'll have time then to shift. But we have to get this done. I mean, it's important that we come up with a great map that everyone can live with for the next 10 years. To Mr. Martin?
I think I made it clear I agree with the concept of not meeting again before, when I made my snide comments about Mr. Lutkehan's lecture. But how do we accommodate the Open Meetings Act? I mean, when the segments of the county meet, the board members and whoever's involved, and that's somebody else's issue, but I just don't want to run afoul of the Open Meetings Act.
Okay, Ms.
If
Neerman's
they
here.
do
She
that,
can
do we
talk
have to
that.
call a committee? Do we have to call a meeting of this group? Or what do we do? All I want to do is
Let Michelle talk to that, because we,
know that procedurally, we're
yeah.
not going to stumble.
great question.
Yeah, we can certainly discuss various options. You could form, ad hoc committees based upon, the north ends and the south ends. You could call this task force meeting and then, I don't know if, it sounds like just the north end and the south end want to show up, if you'll have a quorum. So you might just want to simply appoint some sort of ad hoc committees made up of county board members and task force members, if you'd like, from the north ends and south ends. We can kind of work through that offline.
Okay.
Madam Chair.
Yeah, wait, Mr. Martin is
Well,
still
if
continuing.
because there won't be any action taken by any of these committees anyway. So if we could just say we're going to have a meeting of this group and then make sure that the notice says all we're going to talk about this week is
I
Aurora.
think we addressed that at the
And
outset.
the only
of this
people going to
meeting.
show up are the people that care about it. And it doesn't matter if there's a quorum or not, because there won't be any action taken by that.
Correct.
They
Correct.
can arrive at some kind of an informal consensus that we can then adopt at a point in time when we have the data and all come back as a group here.
That's what we set up before the meetings were canceled. It was a
Ah.
meeting of the task force / Aurora. I think, Mr. Shepro?
Well, I was going to say, I thought at the outset of this meeting, you outlined that the 2 regional meetings would be posted per the Open Meetings Act.
They will
So I
be.
think that issue is taken care of. And further, that any other discussions would be no more than
No more
2
than
board
2.
members. I do agree that at some point, it seemed like it might make sense for this group to reconvene to receive the collected input
Mhm.
so that we know what direction is being given. But that might be as late as just before you're going to start sifting all of the different, obviously, cooperative agreements that are reached. And, that I think could just be a regular meeting with an official report on what everybody has done.
That's
But
what I'd
otherwise,
like
it
to do.
sounded to me like we had the Open Meetings Act covered for these initial meetings.
These 2 will be covered. And I think how we put it, reapportionment task force / Aurora, reapportionment task force / Elgin is what it was.
But-
So you're right.
Make sure I know I don't have to come.
Don't have
if
to
it's-
come. You can, but you're welcome to. We'd love to see you. Mr. Kenyon?
At Geneva Country Club.
I'm thinking here, and we're talking in the sincere attempts to make this right. It's too bad that the other map makers don't try to go through and do this. I'm talking about the state and the national legislative maps. And they just say, here it is. And one of the things that aggravates voters the most is say, well, last time I was in Congress District 6, now I'm in 8, or now I'm in 14. They don't like that. They don't like that. But we're trying to do it honestly and sincerely. Maybe they could just look and see what we're trying to do. Maybe they could be a little more honest. I know that won't happen.
Well, I have to say that I think all of us, regardless of party affiliations, have been working and will continue to work as a whole for the best of Kane County. And I applaud all of you for putting your partisanship aside, even though we're all partisan. And we have to admit that we are, which is fine. But to work collaboratively with this. And once again, I will confirm, we talked about partisanship yesterday when I was talking to Mr. Lugenham. I said, I know nothing about party affiliations in any of these districts. I just want to confirm that. He said, yes. And he said, I'm the only one who knows that. And I said, and I want to confirm that I don't want to know it. I don't want to have it shared with me. And he said, absolutely, I won't share it with you. I said, so let it be known, it will not be shared. because this is based on population and it's based on the voting rights. And that's it. We're keeping it simple. So let's keep it simple that way and keep it honest. And if you have any input, I would we would welcome hearing that. But please make sure that you bring in exactly what your concerns are, because we can't work with generalities at this point. We have to work with your specific recommendations, and those are most welcomed. So with that, if there's no other comments,
I would move we adjourn.
thank you,
Madam
sir.
Chairman. I'll second that.
Thank you.
Jeff Rowe.
Have a great, I'll see you rest of the summer. Oh, we need to vote. Aye?
Aye.
Okay. I hear no nays. Have a great rest of the summer. I'll see you sometime in August.